Marhaba al-Jamia, Shalom lekulam. It's very good to be here. I'm very thankful for Middle East Monitor for staging this event. There's always a danger, of course, that a long and protracted conflict and suffering, as happened to our people, will be forgotten in the world stage, where new events, new dramas are happening, and that's actually been the fate in the last few years. And to keep this on the agenda and to keep the suffering of the Palestinians, unjust suffering of the Palestinians on the agenda is very important, and I thank you for inviting me and for keeping it alive. Now, we have a bit of technology here, and I prepared, hopefully, a presentation that will help us fathom through the processes. First of all, my main argument here is that we are entering a new stage in Israel-Palestine. And we are entering a new stage in Israel-Palestine which is not unlike other settler colonial projects that have not been determined. And I think that's very important. It's unlike, in that respect, the US or Australia that overwhelmed and maybe genocided the native people. Israel-Palestine, we have a settler colonial project which is ongoing, but the Palestinians have not been eliminated, and they are resisting, which is a very major factor where maybe we should consider in more depth. And therefore, we're entering a new stage. And this is very much reflected in two statements here that Netanyahu, the eternal Prime Minister of Israel, has just recently issued. One is just 3 years ago, following the UN Assembly, that we are committed to the Bar-Ilan speech, in 2009, the first time he made this commitment, for the solution of the conflict based on two states for two peoples. Just a few weeks ago, in fact, just 2 days before the elections, he dropped this bombshell. We will now go to the next phase to extend Israel's sovereignty. I do not distinguish between settlement blocks and isolated settlements. All settlements are Israeli. That is in response to a TV interview that says to him, "You are not doing anything of the right-wing agenda. Why don't you annex parts of the West Bank or the West Bank?" And his response, "Yes, we're going to start annexing." So this, in a way, is a new geopolitical stage. And while I echo some of Joseph Massad idea that there is a continuation, and you'll see my lecture, there is historical continuation of over 100 years, still we have, through struggles, have had different stages to it, and now we're entering a new stage. And the nation-state law, it's one of the pinnacles, one of the foundations of a new constitutional stage in Israel-Palestine. So some of my points, it's an unresolved settler-colonial conflict. There are not many like this. In some conflicts, the settler-colonial project is defeated, say like in South Africa, or almost defeated. In some, the whites or the European settlers actually overwhelm the locals, but in some others, like Israel-Palestine, the jury is still out. Of course, the Jews are very dominant, and this is their project, but in Bolivia, perhaps in New Zealand, perhaps in Mexico, perhaps in other places, the indigenous people and the native people have resistance, continuing resistance, that actually the struggle continuing on a structural level. The structural forces that are here are, of course, it's mentioned quite a bit before, colonialism, but also nationalism and also capitalism. We not start an academic lecture now on all the structural forces, but they interact to present, and that's my major argument, a process of deepening apartheid. And this is not declared. This is something that is actually in between the lines, but I think our task as intellectuals and mobilized people is to change the discourse and not talk about democracy and occupation, but to talk about what's actually happening on the ground, which is the formation of an apartheid regime step by step. And this, of course, to mention to everybody, it's illegal, it's a crime, it's a war crime, it's a crime against humanity to have an apartheid regime. There's a World Convention against Apartheid from 1978, and I think that's something that can be mobilized more than the occupation, because the occupation is not illegal under international law. Occupation, of course, nobody imagined that occupation will last 51, 52 years as it is now, but it's not illegal as such, whereas apartheid is a crime against humanity, and I think it's something that can be mobilized. And of course, as a Jew, it's also very, very upsetting for a Jew to live in an apartheid regime. So there's a lot of Jewish people that could join this campaign. And I wrote a few articles before the last election that the next task for the next decades perhaps is to form a front against apartheid that will be Jewish, Palestinian, international, and I think this is what part of the lecture today. Another point that I want to make, and already Suhad Bishara made that quite clearly, I want to join that the present absentees of the nation-state law are not just the Palestinians in Israel. Of course they are, and it's important that they are actually shoved to a lower status in the Israeli state, but very much also the Palestinians in the territory, for the reason that I'll elaborate. But in the debate in Israel itself, they hardly ever mentioned the issue of equality. There is no equality in this law, which wasn't mentioned in the first session. It's important to say. It's a formation, it's a law of all laws that doesn't mention equality, which is a grave injury to the Palestinian citizens of Israel. But as I'll show later, all Palestinians basically are affected by this law, and the real present absentees that are not even mentioned in the debate are Palestinians in the territories. And I want to finish with a few minutes, if we have time, to talk about the new peace movement that I'm one of the founders of, that is called Land for All, El-Adl al-Jamia, and it's Eretz Lekulam, and we talk about 2 states and 1 homeland in a new understanding that we think can decolonize Israel-Palestine and start a movement towards reconciliation. These are the 2 recent books that I did. You see, as academics, we have to have a little bit of a commercial break always. So it came out this year, Emptied Lands, with Sandy Kadar and Ahmad Amara. It's a legal geography of the Bedouins, and I think that's an important neglected part of the conflict that is now actually coming to the surface. And a new special issue of Settler Colonial Studies is coming in the next month. It's about settler colonialism, indigeneity, and the city. And we'll continue on. So, if you like to complete Joseph Massad's historical kind of ideology, development of thoughts, I would put it also in maps and look at the process which is undeniable of the Judaization of Israel-Palestine. So in 1917, we have 67 Jewish settlements. It's a small Jewish community comprising something like 8% of the population, holding on to 2% of the land. In 1947, we already have 332 Jewish settlements. The population of Jews is a third, and they're holding 8% of the land. Then, of course, after the Nakba, 1967, there are 764 Jewish settlements. The state has confiscated most of the land of the Palestinians that remained in Israel, holding now 93% of the land. Then after 67, Jews begin to settle in West Bank and Gaza. And in 1993, on the eve of the Oslo Accord, we have 911 Jewish settlements penetrating deep into what remained Palestinian territories. And just this year, we have 1,178 Jewish settlements. And Jewish control of the land between the Jordan and the sea is now 85%. I'll look at it, and the population is about 50%. So you see how important the geographical process here. And of course, I think that's the heart of the matter. And Massad rightly talked about demography, but demography cannot be decoupled from geography. That is, the Jewish majority will be maintained, and Israel will only annex probably areas that has a Jewish majority. Therefore, they will always maneuver around the question of demography, and we can talk about that in a minute. But that is a very, very powerful settler colonial process that, of course, laws and norms, violence are arranged around this kind of imperative of settling the land. And I think the nation-state law has to be taken in that context. Of course, Palestinian geography, too, has to be studied. So in 1947, we have 910 Palestinian localities, including 11 cities. And in 1949, after the Nakba, we have about 450 Palestinian villages being demolished. Palestinians are removed from much of the land that was supposed to be a Jewish state, and are actually marked where Palestinians were cleansed from. And also Jews, it says to be in very small numbers, but still Jews were driven out of East Jerusalem and some other settlements into the Jewish areas. But of course, this is a structural process, and Palestinian geography has remained more or less since 1949 frozen. The population has grown in the same localities. Very, very few localities were built, mainly for Bedouins that the state wanted to concentrate, and I think this is very much telling the story. So when we get to today, situation on the left, you see the political geography of Israel-Palestine, and the dark green enclaves are the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. The light green are where the Palestinians are in Israel proper. And the white area is land. And I've done a lot of research on this, and also when I was the head of B'Tselem, the human rights organization, we actually did a series of publications about how land has been Judaized. Land is now 85% in Jewish hands, Jewish/Israeli hands, and only 15% in Palestinian. And look at the demography on the right, you'll see that the two populations are more or less equal. So this is the context in which the new stage is actually happening. And the new stage is happening because that kind of geography has to be enshrined in law. It has to be enshrined in regulation. It cannot continue to be temporary or by theft or by turning a blind eye, as happened until the recent time. What all else needs to be remembered here in these kind of different phases, the history of Jews needs to be also mentioned here. In the first stage, the Jews mostly are refugees. The Holocaust is still hanging on as a very, very important injury and drive of Jewish collective identity. And I think that to understand Zionism, you have to understand that Jews arrived into their promised homeland, supposedly from the Bible, as people that are driven out of Europe and then driven out of the Arab world as well. And then the stages that I already mentioned are happening. There's the ethnic cleansing of the Nakba years, independence Nakba years. There's internal colonization, external colonization. Between 1993 and 2015, we have this oppressive consolidation that is Israel is strengthening its Jewish colonization inside and outside of the Green Line, but without major legal changes. And the rupture, the tension between the actual situation on the ground and the legal construct of a democratic and Jewish state, or Jewish and democratic state, are too far to bear. And this is why we see the last stage. And the last stage is following the 2015 victory of the Netanyahu previous elections. And of course, in politics, forces in politics always push for change, for advancing their agenda, and they're actually successful. And from 2015, we see a major change in various, of course, there are roots of this change earlier on, but from the 2015, it's institutional, it's legal, it's geographical, and then the nation-state law. And there are a whole host of changes, and I summarize it in 5 points here. First of all, we have more and more imposition of Israelis' laws also in the West Bank. These are existing laws. This is not new legislation, but new regulation that extend them to the West Bank. You have direct legislation on the territories for the first time. You have legislation about higher education. You have legislation about land, what Suhad said, the validation law. You have, for the first time, direct Knesset legislation on the territories. You have the blurring of the Green Line in many other regulations, and you have new military orders that further and deepen the attempt to concentrate the Palestinians in their enclaves. But it also continues inside the Green Line, and a major area of that is Beersheba, where I live. So you see Beersheba is surrounded by what is considered to be unrecognized or illegal Bedouin localities. Most of these people live on their ancestors' land. They haven't actually moved. These are the people that survived 1948 evictions. Through legal manipulation, they've been declared trespassers on their own land. So the state doesn't extend any services. There's now about 125 to 130,000 people that are in this situation. And in the last election campaign, the government promised that after the election they will remove 125,000 Bedouins, resettle them in modern towns, of course, all for their benefit, so they can actually enjoy modern life in a planned town. And of course that would mean concentrating them and opening the land for more Jewish settlements. So this is inside the Green Line. al-Hiran was a very famous case that actually Suad Bishara also worked on it, and a whole locality that has been evicted to make room to a Jewish suburb there. And in the last years, a lot of my work for human rights in the South, we broke a very negative record. 2,550 house demolitions in the Beersheba region. Just to put it in comparison, in the West Bank, in the whole West Bank, and I'm still keeping these records because of B'Tselem, there are 380 demolitions. Not that that's little, that's huge too. But think about how much more of an attack inside Israel there is on the Bedouins. So Jerusalem too, this kind of logics continue the colonial logic. But there is another interesting issue here, that Israel has another side. Israel has a liberal side. If you go to Tel Aviv, if you go to Haifa, you have a global, cosmopolitan, pluralistic face of Israel. You have very advanced on gay rights. You have the Eurovision in a couple of weeks in Israel. You have women's rights, very impressive campaigns for women's rights. So there's another face to Israel, which I think we have to look at it as clash of logics, right? It's not just the colonial logic. There's others, and the colonial logic is stronger at the moment, but I think we have to consider there's very also other traditions and other political agendas that are happening, and something to work with. There's also Palestinians in Israel that the situation has improved in recent years. There's a Palestinian middle class that hasn't happened before. And of course, Haifa is one of the areas, Nazareth, the whole central Galilee, there is the metropolitan area basically with development and rising living standards. And I think that has to be taken into account, and you'll see how it flows into my analysis of the apartheid regime. One other issue is the legal side. Suad Bishara already covered that, but I'd like to mention in 2015, there was a spate of court decisions that haven't happened before, and this is why it's very important that we are in a new stage, and we call it the Black Spring. There were 4 decisions, one after the other: Al-Uqbi, Susia, Dirat al-Rifaya, and Khan al-Ahmar, and later on al-Hiran too. And in 2017, a very important decision, Amona. In the decision to evict the Jewish settlers, actually the High Court says that it is legal to expropriate land for settlers because settlers are considered local population. This is the first time. And actually, sadly, it was a Palestinian judge that said that, Salim Dubran. So these are a spate of legislation. All of them deny Palestinian land rights, residency rights, and this is the High Court that was in the past, as Suad Bishara rightly said, a place where you can gain and you can protect some rights. It had some important decisions in the past, like Adan, like the Mizrahi Keshet Rainbow, like the several other decisions against torture and against house demolitions. All that seems to now have dissipated and sort of preparing the ground, if you like, for the nation-state law. How much more time do I have?
You have roughly 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, so I'll rush through this. A new legal order. Okay, so we get to the basic law, nation-state. Much of it has already been said, but I'll still draw and stress the importance of these 4 articles. Article 1, for the first time, as it was said, it declares that the land of Israel between the Jordan and the sea, etc., etc., so it changes the geography. But it does that in a sophisticated way. If you read it, it says that in that area there is a state of Israel, and the law only applies to the state of Israel. So it's a sophisticated way to oppose any kind of direct call of apartheid. But I want to stress that within that sophistication, the reality on the ground, actually, it is full Israeli legislation in between the Jordan and the sea. Article 3 on Jerusalem, it wasn't mentioned here before, but it's very important. It enshrines the united Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and only the capital of Israel. That actually already announced the possibility of a Palestinian state, that is Jerusalem should be its capital, or it's a very difficult legal process then to undo that, because, as already been said, it's the law of all laws. Article 7 wasn't mentioned before, and for me it's the most important. Of course, as a geographer and a planner, but this is the first time in Israel's history this is actual law, and not just law, but a basic law, saying that the project of the state is to promote and fund and establish Jewish settlements. Before that, it was always policies of certain arms of governments, or the Jewish Agency, or the Jewish National Fund, or the kibbutz movement, or the settler movements. Now it's actually crowned as the major national project of Israel. And of course, this already has been fought in court, already been used. When we try to protect Palestinian and Bedouin rights, it already been used. That what do you say? This is the basic law to support Jewish settlement, and that's why it's the right to have new Jewish settlements when there is a contested land. So this is another major change, and of course 80% of the Jewish settlement in the last 50 years has been in the West Bank and Gaza, but in the West Bank. So it's very important to know that the reality on the ground, that this Clause 7 is all about the territories. And Article 11 also is very important because it's got legal fortification. This law can be rescinded only by another basic law. This is almost mission impossible. So the upshot is legal regime from Jordan to the sea. And I want to elaborate a little bit about what type of citizenships now were created with the aid of this law and all the other. So we basically have 3 or 4 tiers of citizenships. And Suad Bishara talked earlier her opposition to second-class citizenship, but I can see 3 classes of citizenships in very sort of broad strokes of a brush. There is the Jewish citizenship. Of course, it's got stratification within it as well, but that's for another lecture. That in the prototype of apartheid is the white population. And of course, I would say that apartheid, like democracy, like theocracy, like ethnocracy, is a prototype. It has many sub-examples. And Asad Ghanem, that will speak soon, and I, 20 years ago, we talked about Israel is not a democracy but an ethnocracy. And we projected there is a possibility of ethnocracies, if they don't resolve the conflict, to actually deteriorate to apartheid. And this is actually what's happening. Ethnocracy is gradually turning to apartheid. But then there are Palestinian Arabs in Israel that have citizenship and have lower status than the Jews, but they have a higher status than other Palestinians. So they create, if you like, a situation akin to the Khaleds in South Africa, that were in between the blacks and the whites. And we have the Palestinians in the territories where, again, inverted comma, black, disenfranchised from political rights, have a claim to self-determination is unfulfilled. There's a 4th category of foreigners that are called grey citizenship that is not negligible anymore. It's probably 300,000 to 400,000 people, but outside this analysis at the moment, although it does indicate Israel treatment of, for example, of the African asylum seekers, or the East Europeans that come to Israel, or the Philippines, is actually indicative of this kind of regime. So we're having, this is now becoming from de facto to de jure. You actually can find legislation and regulation that actually stratifies this citizenship, and it's a combination of history and geography, right? Because Palestinians are divided between the different geographies, and you can actually subdivide it also to Al-Quds Palestinian, Israel Palestinian, and West Bank Palestinians, etc. But the Jews attempt to have unified, smooth geography, and that is exactly the difference between geography and rights. And I think this is what the nation-state law actually is now enshrining more and more in writing. And it's a very dangerous stage. It's a very negative stage. And the geography is not dissimilar to what was South Africa until 1994. If you see the Bantustans that were actually the areas where blacks were supposed to have the self-determination, and the rest of the area, 87% actually was supposed to be in white control. In Israel-Palestine, as I calculated, it's 85%. It's not all that different to what, and of course you have to take the Nakab, the Negev further down, and you'll see some, it's not identical. The history of Israel, Palestine, and South Africa are not identical, but nonetheless it's very similar in terms of regime. It emerged into regime. But one big difference between South Africa and Israel-Palestine are the rights of the colonized people. Now, Palestinians, that's important, have the right to a state. And that's the highest right in international law and in international norms. It's been, of course, badly damaged by policies, but I think that's important to think about when we think about how to resist and how to decolonize. So it's got the old colonial order, if you like, and the new kind of arrangement that Israel is trying to impose. And I don't have to convince you, as some other people were already warning about some, very mainstream people like John Kerry warning Israel to become an apartheid state. Ehud Olmert, the Israeli prime minister, when he lost power, he said that Israel will very, very soon become an apartheid state. And I want to spend 2 minutes about how we think in our movement. Eretz Lekulan, a land for all, Bilal al-Jamia, that we think about moving forward. And it's a movement that started 5 years ago. We have a few hundred members from Palestine, a few hundred from Israel, probably about 1,000 altogether. You're all invited to look at our internet site and Facebook. But we think about, these are just, we appeared in the European Union Assembly not long ago. The main idea here is to have two states in one open land. The main idea is to have a confederation. That is, the Palestinians will have a state with full sovereignty. The Israelis, which are Jews and Palestinians, will have self-determination in the territory. The Green Line will not be modified, and the Jerusalem will be a region like Brussels, that is the capital of Palestine and Israel, and a city of two peoples. And a key idea will be there will be freedom of movement. That is, of course, a major change for Israel-Palestine, but nonetheless it allows to have, with minimum disruption, a possibility of moving from a colonial order to one of more of reconciliation and equality between the two people, and sharing the homeland, which is the attachment to the homeland by the Jews and by the Palestinians is almost exactly the same piece of land, and that has to be taken into account when we think about the future. Just recently, last week, we did on the Green Line near Hussam in the West Bank an event that hundreds of people came, mostly Palestinians, but also some Israelis. Of course, the interest among Palestinians is higher, but I think it's a way to the future. And let's end up with this suggestive photograph. It could be the wall closing, which has been for a long time, but optimism might read it that it could be the beginning of the dismantling of the wall. And let's keep these two options open, and thank you very much.